The prognosis for sinners which emerged from these works was, to put it mildly, not encouraging. Visitors to purgatory saw souls in every posture of physical torment, suspended by meat hooks driven through jaws, tongue, or sexual organs, frozen into ice, boiling in vats of liquid metal or fire, and all being fried like fish in hot oil. Often the punishment was carefully matched to the crime. The sexually promiscuous were tormented in the loins, the gluttonous forced to drink scalding venom or nauseous filth. The backbiters and liars had their tongues or lips sliced away. So this is the kind of stuff that people in the Middle Ages are going around with in their heads. This is the doctrine of purgatory, that basically that after death, your soul enters this kind of liminal place between heaven and hell, where for a prolonged period, and in some cases for an eternity, it's purged of the accumulated sins of a lifetime. At the end of that process, and in some cases it never ends apparently, you achieve a state of grace and you ascend to salvation in heaven. And there was no questioning of this whatsoever in the medieval mind. This is what dominated medieval belief systems from the late 13th century up until the Reformation, and as I'll be describing later, it went on a bit longer in Ireland. It dominated medieval belief systems, and it dominated the medieval cult of death. So, because this stuff is going around in your head, and you're walking around and you're starting to creak a little bit, and you're starting to think about the end, and you're thinking about maybe I should make my will and all the rest of it. You want to do everything that you possibly can do to lessen the time that you have to spend in purgatory following your death. And there were certain strategies that could be employed. You could go on a pilgrimage, and we have examples from Ireland. I'll just go on to the next one there. We've examples from Ireland, from Tuam, where people have been buried with pilgrim shells. These were gotten during the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, and they're worn by the person in the grave as a reminder that, hey, look, I went on pilgrimage, I can get time off in lieu in purgatory. And there's a few other examples. We have an example from Kilkenny, Mullingar as well. Same thing. Good deeds was another way to gain remission from purgatory. So almsgiving is a big one. We see it in the wills of the period. Founding an almshouse like this one here, the She Alms House in Kilkenny, which is founded by one of the wealthiest of the late 16th, early 17th century Burgesses, a man called Sir Richard She. And according to contemporary accounts of this guy, he had what was termed a long and stormy life. And when it came to him, he's thinking of his end, and he's thinking about all this purgatory stuff. He really goes to town on trying to get remission out of purgatory, because he goes into the public marketplace in Kilkenny and he repents for his sins. He locks himself away in the parish church, where he repents his sins. He makes confessions over and over and over again. He leaves gold coins for the poor of the city, and he endows this almshouse. It had an upstairs and a downstairs. The women were on the upstairs and the men were on the downstairs. It was specifically for sick and poor widows and widowers. They were allowed in there, but on the basis that no matter how sick they were, how cold it was outside, they were dragged out of their beds first thing in the morning, and they're brought over to St. Mary's Parish Church, which is about 200 metres away, and they're made to pray for the soul of Sir Richard on his tomb. So another way you could gain remission was you could build a bridge or a road, and basically the payback for this was that it would attract prayers for your salvation. So this is the bridge in Holy Cross, and there's a lovely plaque on it. You can see here in the photograph, and it reads in Latin, this is a translation: "To the traveller, Nicholas Cowley constructed me, Lord James Butler, Baron of Dunboyne, and his wife, Lady Margaret O'Brien, rebuilt the bridge which has fallen and ornamented it with their arms in the year of our Lord 1626. Say, I beg you, before you go away, this short prayer: may the two who built it escape the pit of hell." So again, you can see they've gone to the trouble of building this bridge, and they're asking for prayers to gain time off in purgatory. So it was the prayers, it was all these sorts of strategies that people could put in place to gain time off in purgatory. But it's the Mass and the prayers of the living for the dead that give by far the greatest relief, and these were by far the most important. So those who could afford it, they commissioned before their deaths really elaborate tombs like these, which attracted prayers. The more masses and prayers that were said, the less time that was spent in purgatory. They had it all worked out. Main reason for this was because the ultimate terror was to be forgotten by your family, and no prayers are being said, no masses are being said, to be forgotten by your community, and you're forever trapped in purgatory as a result. And in some cases, people, I believe, they went so far as to commission tombs that actually showed their rotting corpses, like these are the so-called cadaver tombs. Various theories about them, but it's pretty clear to me, I think, that their primary intended purpose is to elicit sympathy for the deceased and thereby attract prayers. And this is the James Rice, a fantastic scan, one of these fancy model scans of the James Rice tomb, a cadaver tomb in Waterford Cathedral. It was set up in his own chantry chapel, which he dedicated to St. James, and he died in 1487. And you can see his remains. Here he's shown as a corpse, and there's even a little frog here eating away at his belly, and he's in his shroud. It's an absolutely wonderful piece of macabre medieval sculpture. For other wealthy patrons, they had just slightly down the pecking order. They could build a chantry chapel in a parish church or an abbey or a cathedral like this. I'm quite certain Ferns Cathedral would have had many of these chapels in it in its heyday. And this is an example here of a relatively intact one in Winchester Cathedral. It's the Bishop Fox chantry from the 15th century. And you can see it's got its elaborate, very, very typical, very fine screen, a thing called a part-closed screen, which screens it off from the rest of the church. And inside that, there's monuments that are arranged around the walls. The centerpiece would have been the monument of the benefactor. And inside chapels like this, a priest is then endowed to chant, which is where the word chantry comes from. So to sing a set number of masses for the soul of the benefactor. And generally these are stipulated in the will of the deceased, and they can run into literally thousands and thousands. We have a fellow over in Long Melford, John Clopton, and he pays for 2,000 masses to be said for his soul within a month of his death. So some poor chantry priest had to do little else for an entire month but say mass after mass after mass for Mr. Clopton.